Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of our Farming RPG tutorial series. Right now, if I were to harvest multiple crops in the same crop, they do not stack up, but take up an individual slot in our inventory system. This makes it get full really quickly. This is because we're using scriptable object directly to store information in our inventory. But we want to make things stack and not do this. So we'll be creating a special class to store information about our inventory slots with more than just the scriptable object data. So it's going to take in the quantity as well. Let's call this item slot data. It's not a mono behavior class. So it's going to take in the item data, the quantity. We need a constructor. But you know, sometimes, like for example, if I were to just say, I want this slot to be a tomato, like we automatically assume that the quantity is 1. And you can't have like 0 tomatoes. So let's overload this constructor to just take in the item data. Want to be able to stack our items, which has to do with the quantity. Create a function to handle the addition of items. Let's overload this function to make it easy to just add 1 to the stack. And since we can add, we should also remove. This function will be called whenever a player consumes an item. But every time we remove something from the item slot, we have to take note that once the quantity is 0, the item data should reset to nothing again, because it's empty. For the item slot to be empty, the item data is going to be set to null and the quantity is 0. But this if statement shouldn't only be in the remove function. We should also check it at the constructors, because the player is able to have empty slots. So if we were to construct the class with no item data, the quantity wouldn't be 1. We have to do the checks as well. Hence, we'll move the if statements into a separate function. So there are 2 cases in which the item slot will be empty. So if the quantity hits 0 or item data is null. So here we validate. It's called the validation functions over in the constructors as well. See if it makes sense. On to moving this to inventory manager. So we're going to change all this item data into item slot data. So there's going to be a lot of code refactoring that we have to do. First off, we named all these variables like tools, equip tool, because right now, scriptable object, tool, and item, your item is your slot because they are one and the same. But right now, our slot, when we create slots, the slots are going to have more information. So it's going to take in the item data and the quantity as well. So we can't just keep the names tools and equip tool. So let's do the renaming. Instead of retyping everything, we can just right click, rename. Instead of tools, it's going to be tool slots. Apply. And now all references to it is going to be changed. Likewise, we do the same thing here, equip tool. I'm going to call this equip tool slot. Apply, and it's changed throughout the whole project. Likewise for items, item slots, apply, change equip item to equip item slot. and apply it. Okay, this is where everything gets messy, so follow closely. So we're going to change the type from item data to item slot data. Let's do this for all of them. Now, if we were to look at Unity, there's a lot of errors because we changed the type. We have to change a lot in the equipping and unequipping functions, so let's comment out the contents for now. Now, the reason why we have so many errors across the project that extends to more than just the inventory manager is because we have not encapsulated enough of our code. So the moment we change something, we have to do a lot of refactoring, change a lot of things. Let's go back to inventory manager. This should be private. So in future, if we were to change any of this again, we just have to refactor our code within the inventory manager. So everything is confined here. So first off, we want to access the item data of the item slot. We take in the inventory type to determine whether it's a tool or an item and return the appropriate variable. And we're gonna do a get function for the slots. It's the same thing, but instead of item data, we get the slot itself. It's not just taking any old slot, it's only taking the equip slots. So instead of this, we just get the equipped slot item. So we see the bulk of the problem here is on the display function in our inventory slot. This inventory slot class handles our UI, the UI over in our inventory screen. We want to change some things here. So we also want to take in the int quantity, because we want it to also display the quantity over here. We need to take in more information than just the item data, so let's change this to item slot data. We don't need this because the item to display is going to be from our item slots, and our quantity is going to be from our item slots. So now when we go back to UI Manager, we don't need this. We're going to take these two variables, inventory tool slots and inventory item slots, as parameters. Instead of item data, it's going to be item slot data. Now that the parameters have changed, we also have to change it as well. So the inventory panel is going to be using slot data. And see the errors immediately fixed. Since these variables from inventory manager are now private, we have to use the get functions to get them. Here it's going to be equip slot item tool. And now we have another problem. We took in the tool slots and item slots as parameters because we assumed that render inventory would only be called from inventory manager. But now we see that it's also called from UI manager, and UI manager doesn't know what these slots are. Instead of relying on function parameters to get the slots, let's just create a get function in inventory manager to get the inventory slots. So instead of this, we have to declare each of the variables. Now that UI Manager is sorted out, let's look at the other errors. Okay, let's go to player interaction first. Now you see all our null checks. We want to check if item is null, if the player is holding something, etc., etc. So let's create a function in Inventory Manager that checks for this. Same thing here, but we're going to check if equip item slot is not null. Likewise, equip tool slot. So we get to check if it's an item. Do the same thing for the if statement on item interact. Now we can get to the land. For now, we just get equip slot item of tool. Let's organize our code a little bit. These are the get functions. We need a function to handle the equipping of the player's hand slots, since the player will be picking things up. Again, inventory type. So that's gonna be the type and the item data it wants to equip it with. We don't actually need an inventory type parameter because we can kind of tell what it is from the item data. So instead, let's create a function to discern which inventory type the item data is from. The tool inventory type is made out of equipment data and seed data. So basically, if you can cast it as equipment data or seed data, it's going to be true. Instead of using the inventory type parameter, we'll just apply the isTool function on the item and apply the changes accordingly. Now go to interactable object. We can't directly assign the equipped item slot to the item anymore. Instead, we have to use the function that we just made. Likewise, we do this for the regrowable harvest behavior. Copy this. Most of the errors should be fixed. So now when we go to our inventory manager, let's serialize the field because we want to also have control over it from the inspector, even though it's private. We also need to make this system.serializable. That we should have control over it. Now we have to reset everything again. But you see, every time when I want to give the player a tool, I have to set the item data and set the quantity to 1. But the fact that I'm already giving it an item data, it shouldn't be a 0. It should automatically give me 1. It's going to be a hassle to keep doing this. So the moment that I change the value, it should automatically give me something. OnValidate is called every time a value changes in the inspector or when the script is loaded. So we can make use of this function to also validate our inventory slots. there are a lot of slots that we have to check at once. So let's start small and work on validating one slot first. So we'll add a parameter that takes in slot, and in this case we wanted to automatically assign it a quantity of 1 if the item data in the slot is not null and the quantity is stuck at 0. Use this function to validate our tool and item hand slots. Now to validate the rest of the inventory slots. They are made up of 2 arrays, our tool slots and our item slots. So we'll create a separate function called validate inventory slots. It will take in an array and it will loop through the array to validate each inventory slot. Pass the item slots and tool slots array in the onValidate function. Okay. So now, when I give the player a hole, it's gonna give it 1. It's gonna change automatically in the inspector. Now let's assign the rest of the tools to the player's inventory. Likewise for the item slots, give it a cabbage. It's gonna have 1. Okay, so now that we have this, see, everything's back to normal. It's the same as always. Now on to the UI. So let's enable the inventory panel. We wanted to also display the stacks as well. We'll go to one inventory slot prefab. Actually, we'll go to the hand slot. So we'll create a new text panel, anchor it to the bottom left, shrink it up. So let's anchor to the bottom left. Quantity text. Copy this, put it over here as well. Copy the transform values from this one and put it in the other hand slot. There. Now paste it. Paste it in one of the inventory slot prefabs as a child. Copy the component and paste component values. Now onto the prefab, select this quantity text object and set apply to prefab inventory slot. Now you should see the text showing up everywhere. So let's open up inventory slot script. Make a reference to the quantity text of the prefab. So by default, the quantity text should not show anything. But if there's an item to display and the quantity is above 1, that is when we display the numbers on the stack. There. Now we just have to go into the inventory slot prefab, set the quantity text to the quantity text, and we do this the same to each of the hand slots. Quantity text and quantity text. For example, if you see I had 5 cabbages, Let's see it display. See, now there's 5 cabbages here. And all the others, okay. 2 cabbage seeds, 4 tomato seeds. Let's give the equip tool slot some cabbage seeds to begin with. And this is what our inventory looks like. Now on for the logic for moving the inventory items. Let's go to Inventory Manager. When we move the inventory to hand, it just exchanges the thing, but we also need to check for stacking. So first, let's go to our item slot data. Make a Boolean function that compares its item data with the slot. For now, the criteria to determine if the slot can be stacked is if the slot's item data matches our own item data. Right now, there's only one thing to compare, but in future, if you want to add more attributes, such as rating, size, and all that, you can add to this function. So you just add more and more checks. So this is quite scalable. Let's go back to the Inventory Manager class. In the Inventory to Hand function, we declare a variable for the hand slot we want to equip it to. Since the hand slot can only either be the item hand slot or the tool hand slot, so we use the inventory type to determine which slot we're supposed to be working with. So by default, it's the tool slot. Otherwise, if it's an item, then it will be the equipped item slot. Likewise, we also need to keep track of the inventory slot that we're moving to the hand. The logic is basically the same with the hand slot, so if it belongs to the item inventory type, we will take the slot index from the item slot. After we figure out which slots to work with, we need to check if they are stackable. And after everything is processed, don't forget to render the changes, render inventory. You would think that we could just easily copy and paste the old code for when it's not stackable, but we can't do that. So if we need to cache the item slot data, we need to create a constructor that clones. Because we can't do it like how we did it for this, because it passes a reference, not the variable. So this constructor takes the other slot data, copies the values, and creates a new instance. Now we can cache the inventory item slot data. Now we have a problem. If we want to change the inventory slot's item slot data, we can't do it with the slot to move variable, because it only stores a reference to the item slot data class instance itself, rather than the value of the array element. So instead of first getting the item slot data of the slot itself, let's just get the entire array and then decide what to do with it later. And the inventory to alter is item slots. So instead of this, set the slot index. This is better. Check if this is stackable. If not, we'll clone it. So we change the hand slot to the inventory slot. And update the changes in the scene. Okay. Yep. So if it is stackable, to stack an item, you take the quantity of the item in the inventory slot and then you add it to the quantity of the item in the hand slot. Let's get the inventory slot first. With the quantity added to the hand slot, we can clear the inventory slot. Yeah. We don't need any of the old code anymore, so we can delete it. We only need to call the render hand function when the inventory type is item. Let's check it out. So if I have cabbage seeds here, it becomes 3. Now to move it back. Now for the hand to inventory, so likewise we do the same thing. And then we do the inventory type checks. The same thing applies. We need to find the hand slot to equip it to, and the array of item slots we'll be dealing with in the inventory. We can copy the code from our inventory to hand function. With these variables defined, we can now work on the moving of the items. This is a bit more complicated because we have to find if any of it is stackable. To this end, create a function that iterates through each of the items in the inventory to see if it can be stacked. So this function will take in 2 arguments, the needle being the item that we want to check for, and the haystack being the inventory array that we will iterate through. So it's basically a for loop. And if we've checked every single item in the array and we can't find what we're looking for, it returns false. And if we find a slot that can be stacked, we will perform the stacking operation. The item slot. And then after we add to the stack, we empty. Okay, let's name this function stack item to inventory. We have to return true, forgot. Go back to our hand to inventory function. So now we just have to try stacking. If it cannot stack, it will move to an empty inventory slot. And at the end of it, we're going to do this. So it's going to do the same thing here. switch up the variable names to be the ones that we're using. So if we can find an empty slot, set it to a clone of the hand slot. And instead of setting it to null, we have to call the empty function. There. Don't need any of this. We got an error because the render hand function in Inventory Manager still checks if the equipped item slot is null. So we just have to fix it by replacing it with our slot equip function. Now if you go back to our slot equip function, you'd realize that we are making the same mistake here because we directly check if our equipped item slot is null. The problem is the item slot data class will never be null. So we need to create a function in the item slot data class that tells you if it's considered empty. And in this function, we just have to check if the item data is null. Go back to the Inventory Manager. So dot is empty. Likewise for this. Add an exclamation mark in front because it returns true when it is not empty. Go back to the inventory to hand function in Inventory Manager. We can't directly swap the slots anymore because we're passing a reference, not a variable. Instead, we have to rely on the equip empty slot function that we made earlier. We get an error because the function only accepts item data variables, but we want to pass over an item slot data. Moving over to the equip empty slot function. Now that I think about it, equip empty slot might not be a suitable name, so let's rename it to equip hand slot. Let's overload the function with one that takes in the item slot data. And we'll just clone the item slot. This should work now. Let's check the hand to inventory. Oh. Yep, I mean now it's empty. Remember, we can't use null anymore. So we have to check, find an empty slot. Yep, everything works now. Now let's settle the planting of the crops in the land. So this one has to change. Okay. So right now if I plant, I don't consume any of this. We want this to be consumed, so we'll consume the item using this. See if it works. There. But I still had the icon over there. So instead of directly calling it like that, let's make a function to handle the consuming the item. So we remove But of course, we also have to check if it's null. So instead of this, let's also give this hand slot a little bit of text, like we did with our inventory panel. Go to UI Manager. To quantity text. And by default, the text should be empty. If there's more than that, this, the quantity is greater than 1, then the quantity text. Be converted to string. Just have to set. Now go to UI Manager. Go to UI Manager, get the quantity text, set it over here. You can see we are able to plant and consume all our items. That's it for this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.